And now, please help me in welcoming Alex Ross and Chip Kidd.
Wow. We want to thank you all for coming and for coming to church. I mean, so I just want to start off by talking about you were basically raised in Lubbock, Texas, but then you decided to come to Chicago to get art education.
In a weird way, it's almost like there was no decision in my life, because knowing that my mom had gone to the school here, the American Academy of Art, it kind of made it easy for me to think, I'm just going to follow in her footsteps. So I'm not sure at what age I was always aware of doing that path, but I didn't struggle about it when I was in high school. I was figuring I'm just going back up to Chicago because I spent every summer here growing up. We didn't really travel much during our summer break, so we would caravan up, well, not caravan, you'd have multiple cars for a caravan. We would get in a station wagon and drive all the way up here for 2 days to go to Evanston, Illinois, where my grandmother was. Mm-hmm. And well, both grandmothers would collect at the same house, and we would spend whatever we had vacation-wise, 2 weeks or so here. And so my association with sort of higher popular culture was Chicago, because you had more cool things on television than I did have down in Lubbock, Texas. You know, so half of the time I might have walked around the neighborhood of Evanston, which I love, but I probably spent majority of my time watching television here, just soaking up as much as possible, because I didn't have Battle of Planets at home, I didn't have Spectrum Man, I didn't have Courtship of Eddie's Father. These are all cultural touchstones for me, you know?
Yeah, I think you used the term higher culture.
You have to understand, we had hee-haw in Lubbock, Texas. That was their idea of good syndicated television.
Okay.
So it all started to change around the early 80s when we got some additional channels there, but this is really not what you asked about, so
well,
sorry.
But
that's what interests me.
Okay, but Academy of Art as opposed to the Art Institute. I guess when we were working on Marvelocity, one of the things that came up that I didn't realize, even though we've been friends for over 13 years, is that there was something that happened at the...
Wait, we've been friends for a lot longer than that.
Okay.
We've known each other for over 20 years.
Okay, sorry. It's my cold medication. But there was something that you were exposed to at the Academy that you were not exposed to previously that changed the way that you drew.
Yeah, and again, just making that discrepancy between the two schools. As best I understood it, since I lived in a dormitory with students from all of the downtown schools, oh, hey, nice to see you, is that, you know, the Academy was more for getting a job, being paid to make illustrations fitting a commercial application. And there was a wide range of things you could be doing at the Art Institute, but it wasn't focused towards a commercial career as much, as best I understood it. At least that's what I knew from other students, which included at least 2 roommates of mine who were both going there. So I didn't have the struggle as other people did who might have gone there and thought, I want to get an education that's towards a commercial basis, and then they migrated over eventually. Mm-hmm. So anyways, where was the point of this going?
What I was referring to was when you first came here.
Oh, when I first came, yeah, when I was taking classes there, it was just the immediate thing of drawing from a live model. Looking at life, I was always trying to draw realistically since I was a child, or as best I understood how to draw better, and each year I was trying to improve, and I wasn't always trying to copy just a specific artist that I loved from comics, although I have my periods of doing that where I was very deeply in love with the work of George Perez, and I would imitate him all the time, or the great Bernie Wrightson, who I would copy him, but I would do, just horror stuff with him. And so I had points in my teenage years that I dabble with that, but mostly I wanted realism. So coming here, having a class where you're seeing a live model, you're asked to draw that every day of the week, which was the schedule back then, for a few hours a day, it was like a jump start to my system. The sense of like, oh, I think actually I can capture this pretty accurately. And I thought if you wanted sharp realism, you had to trace images. That's what I had believed. And my mother had taught me that like, oh, those super tight realistic paintings that you like, those are all artographed. It's the machine that they used to use back in the day. And that's not necessary. You can approximate reality by your visual matching of it reasonably well.
So it is hand-eye coordination.
Yeah. It all comes down to just what are you after? What is it you most desire to have? If you really desire realism, you can achieve it. It has to be what you're driven for.
Do you felt like you were taught how to do this, or that you were taught to figure it out for yourself?
In most ways, it feels like I was taught to do it by the nature of the school. They're giving you these models every day, and you're meant to not over-interpret at that point. You're meant to reflect back what you got coming in. So certain people had exaggerations they might have had in their styles, because a lot of people come in with the way that they've been drawing for years on their own, out of their imaginations. And I didn't have such a distinctive physical alterations I was looking to do to figures. I wanted to understand the specifics of humanity, the frailty, the unideal nature of the human body, as well as the ideal nature. And we had a cross-section of models that were all very good-looking people, but their specific humanity would inform my work and my desire to want to make things seem more real. So since I love superheroes and I love the idealized figures that come from that kind of mythology, I want to apply this realism to make the fantastic stuff seem that much more real, which is what ultimately would lead to my wanting to use particular people I knew as the basis for things that, I could augment their likeness to match, say, give them a stronger jawline, make the figures more muscular, whatever, but bring in aspects of their human features that are unideal, wrinkles or just the way that the skin can sag. All those things are beautiful things to import into the work. And now, of course, since we have realism mixed with fantastic elements with both illustration and adaptation into film and television, it's kind of something we take for granted now, but it didn't used to be that way.
Yeah. When we were upstairs in the green room, you were meeting with some students here, and somebody asked a question about technology, and one of the things that I love about your work and the books that we do, Mythology and Marvelocity, is that I think the underlying, one of the underlying messages, I think, to me, is that everything is completely done by hand. There is no computer work involved at all. And I think
that shouldn't sound that weird, though.
It shouldn't sound that weird, but it is. Well, I don't know that weird is not the word, but I just think that's so important to emphasize, because...
Really?
Sure. Because when I talk to civilians who haven't seen your work before, and I show it to them, and I say that this is gouache on paper.
But then again, think about all these painting styles that you can find. There's certain brush aesthetics that are within computer programs. They've been developed over time to mimic the look of real painting techniques, whether it's oil or watercolor. And so when I see artists doing that, I often think, well, why don't you do that in reality? You don't have to have it be a matching graphic that's trying to mimic this other thing. Now, of course, the reason that they're doing it in the computer is because of the infinite flexibility of how much you can change it and decide, you can layer things in a way that allows you to take incredible control of everything. And since I don't have that same capability, since, you know, if I screw it up on the page, that's it. It goes to print, or I scrap it and start over, which usually I'll print my mistakes and just figure I'll get it better next time. But, you know, but I understand the reasons for that playability of being able to control things, absolutely. But what that also puts you in the box of is when you're working in the commercial world at what's happened in the last 20 years because of the growth of computer art directors you deal with, they think, oh, I can ask you for this, and countless changes because they're just layers on a computer file and you can easily go back in. If they ask me for changes like that, I can, you know, play the prima donna that I am and complain about it and say, it's paint on paper. You're asking me to gloss over what I just did and paint on top of that same image, which is harder than a computer fix.
Yeah, I mean, you were working on something recently, or we were talking about it, where I forget who the client was, whether it was DC or
Video game company?
Yes. Was that the Mortal Kombat thing?
No, that was years ago. But oh yes, that was the conversation we just had. Yeah. Where the art director, the key person in charge of the job, where they had handed me a layout. This is uncommon for me. Usually, I do my own layouts for any of the jobs I get, but a very talented artist that I knew had done a layout with the figures, and it was even somewhat inspired by a painting I'd already done, so I wasn't offended by this. It mashed up both DC and Mortal Kombat characters together, and it had, you know, color to it, so it just now needed to be painted by me. That was the commission. And when I turned in the painting, the Grand Poobah programmer over there said, yeah, can we change the background to red instead of green? And it was like, well, that'll be, I'm having to paint over the entire background now to get it back to white to then put that other color on top of it, because that color's in everything. It's been not just the background, it's intermingling into figures, it's affecting all of it. And if you're working on the computer, which would be his world of what he knows he can ask artists to immediately change, it can be done like that. With me, it's going to be much more onerous. And so, at least in that case, the comic publisher that was running interference for me said, like, no, that's it. You asked for that, you get this. And it was no muss, no fuss. But it basically means the computer arts allow people to be taken advantage of more and pushed around more. That's the way I view it.
Well, and that's the bane of my existence with a lot of the stuff that I'm doing.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, because you could speak to that better than I can.
Well, what I'm doing is a little bit different than what you're doing in graphic design, but yeah, the really scary thing is when I'm doing book covers and the author wants to come visit you and let's watch you
work. Which is a horrifying idea, right?
It sure is.
Yeah.
Yeah, and sometimes you can say thanks, but no thanks. But you know, when it was John Updike, you really couldn't say that.
Well, I got a question for you based upon your work, since, of course, as many of you might know, Chip is famous in the world of graphic design, which is uncommon, and he is a rock star as far as being a book jacket creator, designer, and he's done these phenomenal books, of which I've been lucky to be in the line of many of the art books he's done, focusing on the world of comics and that kind of pop culture stuff. So I know from various books that you've wanted to do, like the follow-up to the Batman manga, Batmanga is what it's called. You would have done Superman next, and may still one day, I would pray.
I would really like to.
But, you know, we've had this conversation going back, I would say, almost 20 years about, I'm grateful to get the love that you've heaped upon me, but what about all these other awesome people? And if you had taken the same time with people like Jack Kirby or Neil Adams or whoever else would pique your fancy to create the kind of art book where you go in there with your vision to approximate their work, pick out images, the way you crop things, present things, it could be more of that same body of work you've done. Why not have that passion for some of these other people? We need more books like
Well,
that.
I don't. Jack Kirby's dead, and
Oh, come on.
No, I know.
I mean, you've expressed that you don't have as much of a connection to some of these other things or people,
Yeah.
and maybe people's the wrong thing. Maybe it's just subject matter. Like, I could imagine a pop culture book of you just about DC toys in general, not specifically Batman, but
Yeah.
all of it.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I sort of have to totally love whatever the person is, or whoever the person is, or their work. I felt, with Kirby, I've always had tremendous respect, but I felt like he was sort of covered. Like people like.
Except he wasn't.
Well,
he didn't get the kind of treatment. Still hasn't gotten the kind of treatment you've given me now 3 times.
You don't think the Abrams Kirby book was good?
It's not visual in the way that you would have made it.
Well, all right.
I mean, it's much more of a book in terms of the content that's written by Mark Evanier. Whereas what you've created with me is less about the great story that is my life, because that's it's...
Well, it's not. It's like it's the great story. And just being able to work with you that way is amazing, and get that kind of freedom to like tell your story, which is one of the great American contemporary stories of a little kid who that's all you ever wanted to do, and you figured out.
The majority of people that are doing what I do for my living are kids that were drawing same time I was, all through their lives wanting to make comics, and I'm one of those lucky guys that got a chance to do it.
I mean, I don't feel the same way about them that I feel about you. It sounds like we're going to propose any
more
moment.
books like this.
Yeah, I mean, all the stars sort of have to line up for a project like this. I'm trying to think of what the next thing I'm going to do that's even remotely like this. I'm not sure.
Well, like say, there's a wonderful book on Dan Close's body of work.
Yes.
You're a fan of his, but
Right.
you didn't do this book. You wrote some stuff in the book.
I wrote a piece for it, yeah.
But that's an example of somebody who creates similar work. Not similar, but, the field of work.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, and Chris Ware. I mean, I would have liked to have done it for him, but he did it for himself. And
That's all him designing that book?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And you wouldn't really want it any other way. In a way. So who knows?
In some ways, when looking at his book, it reflects your influence in his life graphically. I think
Really?
I think that some of the big images and the way that he's presenting his work, I mean, I think he's much more exhaustive, wanting to make sure you're getting all of it.
Yeah.
But I see you in that work.
Wow. I'm flattered, because I think he's like, I'm on like a level here and he's on
Yeah,
a
I
level
know.
there. But we were talking backstage about things going forward that you would like to do, and with the new movie that's about to come out.
Yeah.
You would very much like to do,
Queen.
and Freddie Mercury.
Oh, yeah.
But it's been difficult for you to get their attention, or.
Yeah, I mean, we've been in touch with their people, and there's 2 licenses. There's the one for the band, which the band members judge, or at least the 2 guys that are still involved with it. And then there's Freddie's likeness and licensing on his own, which I guess his sister takes care of, and I've submitted stuff to both. And it was kind of an outright brush-off from the British representatives for Queen. I'm not sure where it currently stands with Freddie, but I did a piece of Freddie circa, 74, like when he still had the long hair and had the open. And in fact, it's one of those outfits we see in all the trailers of him singing probably Bohemian Rhapsody. And I knew some of the things that, like when you're approaching bands with their likenesses of these very real people who, the licensing intention is to never unflatter those people. So don't embrace a really ugly angle of their faces or whatnot. And, I know maybe, you'd be a little bit shy about the teeth, A photo's one thing, an illustrator going in and really breaking it down into, their own way of interpreting these things can make something a little insensitive.
But I have
I didn't have that issue.
But I get a sense that they were very influential to you.
Oh, the band? Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Oh, well, I mean, it's sort of the soundtrack of my life. I mean, I've been trying to get work done with, I've done work now with the Beatles. I'm trying to get work done with the Monkees. I've submitted some pieces to them. Bowie, we're in conversation with, and not the man, the company representing him, of course. But the fact that that's going anywhere is amazing. And I still think there was a chance I'll get something happening with Queen. And aside from all this, even in the same realm of popular culture, I feel, in terms of, really impactful stuff, I got a piece done with Monty Python that, for the 5 living members, there was no fussing, no fighting, no pushback on anything. They greenlit it, no trouble, and I can't believe that even happened. I was able to cram everything I loved about that show, those men, into one illustration, and it reflected all things from films to television, and even acknowledging like the very first episode I saw when I was 6 years old.
Wow.
And which not that anybody cares, I'm going to say it anyways, where I lived at that time in Dallas, Texas, in '76, that was the test market in America for where the show first came over.
Really?
It didn't go to New York. It came to the Midwest. It came to Dallas, of all things, and I saw it, and it had nudity in it on PBS.
I remember.
Oh.
I remember Terry Jones playing the piano.
Well, yeah, that was not the nudity.
Probably was not the nudity that you were looking at.
But anyway, so sorry, I digress. But like this piece I've done, actually I've shown a piece of Queen, figuring that they'd already kind of turned down the sketch, and I still think I'll make it as a painting one day, whether or not they're going to allow me to do it as a license. But I did a piece that was reflective of one of my biggest influences with the band, which is artwork created for the News of the World album.
Yeah.
Where
they were based on a strange
Frank Kelly Frias illustration from the 50s or 40s.
Strange Tales or one of the pulps.
Yeah, it was the robot holding this man that it unintentionally had killed. And in this case, they loved this art so much that the band asked for the same artist to recreate the piece, except it's all the members of the band, and so they're falling out of the robot's hand. And then in the interior gatefold illustration, back when there used to be, we have vinyl now. Vinyl's popular again, right? So people know what that means. The gatefold illustration inside, the robot's reaching through inside of what would seem to be the Colosseum. The roof that's burst through, and it's reaching through, and you've got all these people running this way and that. I've already put a cameo into one of my books in the Kingdom Come series, where all those people are running from Superman instead of from this giant robot. But here I've done an illustration layout that has, you could probably find it online if you look up Queen with me. You'll find this sketch image in black and white that I did of Freddie kind of bursting forth with the band sort of flowing around him. They're all playing their instruments, but there's a robotic hand bursting through the ceiling of the theater, and you get a sense of the crowd sort of surrounding the perimeter. It's meant to almost be like an action shot, as if like the performance of the band is almost a pushing back against this overwhelming force. So,
and it was a completely breakthrough album for them. It changed their career.
Well, having the "We Will Rock You" song on it, that would pay dividends for the rest of eternity, basically.
Switching gears a little bit, back to superheroes.
And I could talk about Queen for the rest of the
time. What would be the next superhero story that you would want to tell?
Oh, currently sort of working on some different ideas with Marvel about stuff they'd like me to do with them, and that would be pretty free range of what stuff I'd want to create. So in some ways, that question will be answered, hopefully in the next year, things I'll be working on with them, some of which I'll be illustrating, some of which I'll be kind of masterminding the project. So I'll have a hand in a number of things with them if it looks like it's all going to work out. So, but in so many ways, my mind has been based upon trying to create that great American graphic novel so that I could do a longer project, 200 more pages, much like I did for either Kingdom Come and Marvels, where it's an original narrative that isn't owned by anybody else and isn't intended to be owned by Marvel or DC, where it's properties I've created not for the sake of merchandising, but to tell a tale. And if I think about it as a finite thing, to try and tell one novel, it seems much more reasonable. But I don't have a modest idea in terms of something that wraps itself up in like 60 or 90 pages. I keep creating too many elements that pack up into a very long project, and to get it done, I'd have to almost push off all of my other commercial work to do it, which I would like to do at some point.
Wow.
You know, because at a certain point, I'm illustrating the same characters over and over again,
Yeah.
which I've done for almost 30 years now. But it's also fun to do that, and even if I can work exclusively on concepts and characters that are of my own making, there's a lot of love I'll bring to it, but in some ways you're never going to have that same attachment to things that you had from the things you grew up with, you know.
When would it take place?
The story?
Yeah.
Oh, it's some, you know, time unknown kind of thing that I'm creating, sort of maybe a set in the future thing that deals with, it's so overly convoluted. I've never explained the concept to anybody because I just figured that, you know, people are going to get bleary-eyed after 5 minutes of hearing me talk.
Well, you could explain it to me.
Yeah. You'll tell me you won't like it, and then I'll just be heartbroken.
No, I won't. So, do you ever get asked to do input on films? Well, wait, okay. The Glass Project.
Yeah, that you can call that kind of close in a way, because when M. Night Shyamalan created the movie Unbreakable, well, he was filming it 20 years ago. It came out in 2000. Mm-hmm. He contacted my art seller, who's still the same art agent for me, my friend Sal, and we were coming into Philadelphia anyways. We met him in person, and he said, hey, you know that film you've seen that the trailers for, that's actually a superhero thing, which I was suspecting it might be, because it was still mysterious as to what the film was about. And he said that it was actually influenced in some part by my work. I didn't know how pervasive that is. I don't think Knight's a huge comics fan per se, but he liked the genre enough to want to immerse himself into trying to make a credible, almost like if it was real, it would be this. You know, if any of this could happen in reality, this is as close as we can get. And that was before, of course, the wave of superhero movies we've had for so many years now. So back then, the only involvement that I had was I got invited to the premiere and then invited to work on some illustrations that came in the DVD package, which back then, DVD packages were all tarted up with all kinds of extras and stuff that they don't necessarily bother with the same way anymore.
Right.
But so knowing that he was making a film that was a sequel, or even a third part to this kind of trilogy he has now between Unbreakable, Split, and now Glass, my agent reached out to his people to say, hey, why don't you get the guy to do some comic art so your phony comic books in the movie are less phony looking than they were in the first film. Which was something that I said to him at the time. If you can imagine my lack of social demeanor when I'm at his movie premiere and I say like, so what's up with these comics in the movie? You don't do that to people at their premieres. You be polite and not offer criticisms.
But it's true. It's amazing to me when when movies get that stuff wrong. After they've like spent so much money and effort to make everything else look good.
Right. It seemed like he didn't want to necessarily have to pay for licenses of existing things, but when you're showing me phony artwork from like a legendary comics figure,
obvious.
It's like, well, that would have had to be Neil Adams for the way that Sam Jackson was talking about this fictional artist. And it takes me right out of the reality of the movie because I know the history of published comics. Even as much as there's so many comics, there still is a limited number of people who have made the impact that would sort of filter into the story the way he had it. And so I wished that I could have almost been a consultant for him 20 years ago.
Right.
And this time, at least, the contact led to I did a cover that's going to be in this movie with a made-up character that Knight conceived the name, and then I did the design for, and I worked it to his request. And actually, then I wound up doing a poster for the movie that was released at San Diego.
Right.
San Diego Comic-Con.
Right.
So,
The poster was released. The movie comes out in February.
February, yeah.
Have you seen any of it?
No. I wouldn't want to, actually.
Really?
Before. I would like to be surprised, yeah. You know, I'm thrilled when you see something that you like well enough and you don't necessarily have all this advanced knowledge. I mean, I feel like in some ways I know too much already.
Really?
You know, because I had to draw all these elements that are reflected in the new movie in that poster.
And how was that communicated to you then? Did you get a brief?
By email, yes. So that means that I get emails sent to an account that my wife can open for me and show me the images because I don't do the typey. I never learned how to type.
Yeah.
So,
well, I can tell you.
I don't recommend. You should learn how to type.
For what it's worth, for somebody who acts as Alex's editor and publisher and sometime art director, the fact that he does not have a cell phone or an email account makes it lots of fun.
Oh, wait, no. We share a cell phone, and you've never had any trouble reaching me because I'm always home. I'm always in my office, and that landline works just fine.
Yes, I know. I know. I'm just being bitchy. So, okay, Marvelocity's been out now for a month, and I feel like when we were working on it, I just thought, you know, are people gonna, like, people knew about it, but I don't think they really knew what it was gonna be until they finally saw it. So what have the reactions been that, I don't know, maybe surprised you, or
how many people weren't familiar with the last one we had done? And of course, it's been a fair amount of time, 15 years, but you do find that, like, oh, there's been enough people that have come into following my work or your work that are completely unaware that we'd already done this once.
of mythology? Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And, you know, mythology is its own unique animal. We both thought, like, maybe there's no reason for a Marvel book simply because I did one main painted series of, like, about 200 pages for Marvel back 25 years ago, and then I went on to a career of doing multiple projects for DC with a higher page count.
Right.
And so that was the stuff you could pull much more from to make a book. And so my body of work with Marvel gets into more single images, posters, covers, and things that built up over this amount of time, but maybe it wasn't the same level of content, but we create the illusion of content in this book.
Well, the Marvel book is a good 100 pages more than the DC book.
But the thing is, most people want to see the cover images anyways. They don't necessarily want to see a repeating of, like, hey, we have this many of the pages from Marvels where the guy's hanging out with his family. Nobody cares to see that.
Well, I don't know that that's true, because there's every time I go back to looking at it, there's something there that I didn't see before. It's amazing to me that you layered so much stuff in there.
In Marvels?
Yeah, at such an early age. I mean, you were what, 21, 22?
All along those ages when I worked on it, yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing, amazing. And
that was all just prep for Kingdom Come.
Seriously?
No, but in some ways, what I learned from working on that series, getting the kinks out of my own work, you know, like I was working in advertising where the primary medium we would use is marker on layout paper. Because you're just making a quick color illustration and then that's used for a storyboard. So I wasn't comfortable with water-based media yet. I spent my second year of art school studying oil painting. And as much as that was satisfying on a graphic level, it didn't apply to the needs of the commercial work I was going to be doing.
Right, because you wouldn't be doing it in oil.
Yeah, I thought that, oh, well, I can use colored pencil. That kind of looks a bit like oils, the way you blend them all together. Well, that kills your hands. I don't know, some of you might know colored pencils reasonably enough as artists, and it can be really onerous. And I found I fell out of love with it along the way. But when I was first starting my pitch for Marvels, back in 1990, it was a mixture of all those things. Markers, colored pencils, and water-based media, which I still didn't feel I had the handle on. So while I'm in the first issue of Marvels, I'm getting better at painting the figures completely without any other added. Like, I didn't think that the watercolors I had would give me a bright enough red for the Human Torch to glow with. So I would go in there with marker to put in the red on him, just because it would seem to react more on the paper. And of course, it fades as time goes on now.
And bringing it back to Chicago, your first job out of school was at Leo Burnett. Correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. And how much would you say you learned there as opposed to school?
It was an awesome continuing education. I consider myself extremely lucky that I got to not have to struggle for as long as obviously many people do, not finding an application for their skills, that I was able to get in there roughly 2 months after I graduated in '89, and then I was doing that job, which, you know, you're having to draw things you don't care about, you know, whether it's domestic situations in kitchens or people drinking beer or whatever. You know, I got real good at drawing the Miller Lite can, you know, but you know, you have to really get your enthusiasm up for drawing things that is the meat and potatoes of getting across content of something. So don't have everything hang upon whether or not you're excited about this particular thing, or make yourself excited. That's a good task. It's getting yourself challenged with, I want to make this person, this figure, this background as good as it can be drawn. I have to make myself interested. Usually for me that meant if I have a photo of the subject, of either the object or the person to work off of, I can reflect back off of that reality something, you know, with some enthusiasm and get it done reasonably fast. And that's what I learned from Burnett.
Cool. All right. We could be talking here a lot more, but
why don't we?
We're going to do some Q&A with the audience, and there will be microphones.
Yeah, so we're going to circulate some mics. Hallie over here has a mic, and I'll bring one over to this side. If you would like the mic, please just raise your hand and we'll come on over. Folks on the balcony, if you'd like to ask a question, please come down to this level and check in with one of us, and we'll get your question answered.
I have a question right over here.
I would like to know whether when you drew your Marvel or DC comics, you were ever influenced by science fiction, or speculative science in your drawings.
Do you mean the realm of science fiction fantasy?
Yes.
Storytelling? Yeah. My strongest connection would probably be from illustrations that were within the pulps. So I'm not a big reader of prose science fiction or prose period. I can read. I read lots of magazines. I swear I do. I read lots of things. They're just words. I just hate prose. So that's nothing to do with science fiction. Sorry. But as far as connection to the ideas or imagery of science fiction, I would pull from. There's a wonderful book that I think was printed in the early 70s. It's a big science fiction book of pulp imagery that came out then that my brother had, and I was always looking at that as a kid. And a friend of mine from Burnett also had one of these books, and so when I was working on Marvels, I would be pulling from images in there, and something about the look of artwork in the 30s and 40s would be very entrancing to me. So if I could connect with those things, it felt like it would inform and create some other additional depth to the work.
I can definitely see that in your stuff.
And in so many ways, the kind of artist I am is almost like a modern equivalent of the pulp artists that were working so heavily in the 30s to the 40s. And, you know, of course, those magazine kind of illustration jobs dried up at some point in the last 40 years. Yeah. So really, for that same level of illustration, you go to comics or for video games to find people like that.
Great. We've got a question right back over here.
Okay.
Hi. Hi. So as a current student, senior in the American Academy of Art, I find it kind of actually hard to find a way to approach our art and without, you know, violating copyright type of styles. So it's kind of like, what is your your opinion and also like your like how would you approach it if you're in the position of being a smaller person to, you know, reach out to not being considered as fan art or approaching like bigger companies and stuff like that?
You mean in terms of whether or not you can get away with sort of aping another person's work?
I mean, I don't know. It's just like, as someone who's like, you have to either consider yourself as fan art or, like, I don't know, it's kind of hard to approach this way, but it's just like on copyright in general. Like, sorry, I'm having a hard time right now.
No, that's okay.
Do you mean like if you want to do a character mashup?
I guess.
Well, like, I mean, when you think about the way that your work is often seen by people now is online.
Yeah.
And you can post whatever you want without any real infringement of copyright because you're not publishing it. You're showing off your work, you're showcasing your own private works. And if there's no insinuation that you're offering your talents like, hey, I'll draw these corporate characters for you for pay, you can create all kinds of art based upon that to show off what your skills are, to get interest in you. And then if the attention you're looking for, assuming to jobs, can come your way, they're going to, of course, be asking you to do things they can legally have you do. Yeah. And when it comes to artist styles, I mean, if that's I think you mentioned that in part of your question, that, if you're close to another artist that it might be considered, maybe too similar, in some ways you will continue to grow away from that and grow more into the specific person that you are. And I wouldn't necessarily want to discourage people from allowing themselves to embrace a style that they really love. I've seen it happen in comics for decades, and some of the artists I've loved the most had whole careers based upon being a second-rate version of, Jack Kirby or Neil Adams. And I don't hate them for that. I love them for being that when they could do work that that other person wasn't doing.
Also, just a quick note, I have something from Richard Kriska for you. There you go.
Great. We'll take a question over there.
Rich Kriska was my illustration teacher, just so people know.
Hello.
Oh, hi.
Hi. I know you have developing art prints with Sideshow Collectibles.
Yeah.
Exclusively to them. Is there any plans that you're going to be working with them on creating statues based on your art style?
They want me to, and I just have to carve out the time in my life to do it. They made it easy on me, saying like, look, you could just design them and you could have these other sculptors do the work based upon your drawings, which I've done over a number of things. But eventually when I get over the fact that I have a limited amount of time and realize I'd better just entrust them and their people to do it, I was hoping to try and sculpt again myself, at least to start off the project, because they want me to do some of my DC characters in a series of quarter-scale statues. And I have faith enough in my own skills, but not necessarily all the time that I should have to make it happen. But that is in conversation, for certain.
On the side.
Oh, sorry.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm a student at the American Academy of Art who is trying to break into the comic book industry when they graduate. And I was wondering if you had any tips or tricks of the trade that you might want to share.
Well, I mean, the key thing that they're observing when they see your work is whether or not you're doing full storytelling. Artists that can do, much like I do now, just the premium stuff of single-shot covers and compositions that just take up that space, they see a lot of that, and that doesn't help them in the nuts and bolts work that needs to get done in comics. They need to tell stories, they need to see that you're capable of quality storytelling, and that's what they will be judging. So if you have a portfolio filled with a bunch of pinups, they can give you feedback for that to say whether or not they like the work, whether or not they consider your skill strong, but they're still going to blow back to you with the sort of thing of come back to us when you have storytelling.
And just to get more specific about exactly what storytelling is to maybe some of the audience that don't quite know, it's going from point A to B to see to convey a narrative of what is going on.
Yeah, following multiple panels, illustrating a story, showing your understanding of how to flow through a page. And of course, there's plenty of scripts that are out there that you could follow as a guide point if you don't have anything. You could either write yourself, or you could go to an existing script to not copy what another artist has already done, but show exactly the way you would tell a story, and hopefully show the strengths of what you've understood about comic book storytelling. Because not everybody who's even been in the business for decades has it down as a perfect science. Yeah. There's loads of bad storytelling in comics, and I've certainly done some myself, but that's what they will be evaluating. And
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Great. We've got a question right up in the middle here.
Hey there. Just wondering if you have any interest in working in translating your art style to an animated medium. If there's something you have any interest on, if there's a plan for that in the future. Just curious on that. And thanks for your work.
Well, that's the kind of thing that's been talked about with properties I've worked on, books that have been considered to be adapted, like Kingdom Come, where they kind of every few years threaten the idea of that being turned into a cartoon. And, you know, if it's just notoriety of like, hey, they turned it into a cartoon, isn't that fun? I would think the point of that story was very much, you could find, you needed the realism of the work to get across. Now, I don't expect it to be a live-action movie, but as computer graphics grow and evolve, I'm expecting in my lifetime we'll see it become much more affordable to adapt work like mine and others where you didn't actually have to work with actors, or, well, you probably will with motion capture, but you could illustrate a Superman to look exactly like the bulky guy that I've drawn, and you don't have to worry about who's physically available in the work pool of Hollywood. You could just create characters out of thin air that look like real people. And I want to see that happen. I've had conversations with people about that kind of work being done in a prototype fashion, but nothing's ever gotten off the ground. But I can say that the lead model from Kingdom Come, my father, has been scanned digitally so that should this happen at some point in the future, he's been physically saved.
That's a good thing.
We have time for about 2 more questions.
This fellow up here, I want to help out. He's been raising his hand a few times.
Awesome. We're going to get the mic right down to you.
Thank you. So my question is regarding, so you grew up within the 80s and 90s, and I was curious if you had ever been approached or had approached companies like Wizards of the Coast or White Wolf Publishing to do art for role-playing games like Dungeons & Dragons or Vampire the Masquerade or Werewolf the Apocalypse.
Werewolf of the Apocalypse? That's actually a thing? Wow. No, I don't know that I have been approached by them. I might have, but no, I have many friends who came from the same art school that went on to work in that field. And to me, I'm more linked to back when it was TSR up in Lake Geneva. So that's what I think of when I think of role-playing. And so since it's all been taken over, I think all out in California now, I don't know any of the people involved, but many people I've known have done work for that stuff. I don't know that I'm enough a fan of general fantasy that it would ever be a passion for me. A lot of my drive, my ambition for fantastic characters does relate to the mashup that is superheroes.
Is it accurate to say that you've turned down a lot of video game work, and largely due to the violence component?
No, I'm all for violence. No, no, not really. Not really, I'm kidding. You know, like, speaking of violence, like every time I have to draw zombies, I'm so bored with it. I don't care for drawing desiccated flesh. It doesn't appeal to me, or it's not that I can't stand to look at it, it's just like when you're trying to break up the human form and have it decaying, it just, I'd rather draw a man wearing spandex. For whatever reason, that's the way I'm wired. You know, I'm happy when other people
rather
do it.
see that.
Yes.
So good for you.
No. No. Anyways.
I don't know. I was under that impression. Sorry, about turning down a lot of video game stuff.
For the violence aspect?
Well, I don't know. Or you must be like not interested in it, or bored
Well, I
with it.
don't play the medium, whereas I do like with games like the Spider-Man one that happened recently, or friends of mine here in town made the Injustice game, which I'm sure some of you have heard of, and they did a great job with this game, and if you watch it on YouTube, you can watch the whole cinematics for it so that you can see the story that was animated aside from the gameplay, and it makes a full movie. I mean, it makes a 3.5 hour, 4 hour long movie.
Really?
And it's a movie starring a realistic version of the Justice League because it's all computer generation. It's a lot like, to answer the question about animation of my stuff, I could see something like that happen with my work as that, as the computer generated graphics continue to mature and get better with each new offering. Just like the Spider-Man one has a costume that I designed in it, and you know, it's cool to watch it, but I don't have that lifetime connection to holding the controller and feeling myself on the gameplay, nor do I like that constant repetition. For me, it doesn't connect in my brain. I had a Atari system for one summer back in 1983 and got it out of my system then, and I don't know. I'm sorry if that's insulting. I don't mean to be.
All right, we've got time for one last question right back here.
Okay, make it a good one.
Thank you. Alex, it's great to see you here, and I know you were at Wizard World out in Rosemont a few years ago. So my question is, do you spend much time interacting with your fans? And if so, do you ever incorporate any of their suggestions into the work you do?
Oh, God, no. No. No, actually, no, I mean, I'm being flippant, but no, I mean, generally people don't necessarily make suggestions when they meet me so much or say, hey, you ought to be doing this. No, I just, you know, when I get a chance to meet people, it's always good to be met by their enthusiasm, and if they are meeting you because they like your work, that's a positive thing. So that's the most that I get from people. I don't get a lot of telling me I should be doing something additional, what I'm doing, and of course, if somebody has a great idea, you're supposed to avoid using that in your work because then they'll come after you later with a lawsuit.
Right, yeah.
Or the company. So I'm not supposed to be transmitting somebody else's idea. But if people ask, say, we'd like it if you do more storytelling, well, I hear it, and I'd like to as well.
Right, but you've got cover work to do.
I do some storytelling, but it's a terrible answer as to the why there's not more. And, you know, ultimately in the last 20 years, I'm getting off on a whole different point, but in the last 20 years, special projects like the kind that kind of created my career, limited series that were prestige format that might have painted art or some other kind of unique art.
Less and less.
They happen far less and less. Yeah. We've had a resurgence now and again, but it's not a strong commodity, and comic sales plateau at a certain point. So it becomes a lot of hard work that there's not necessarily always the same reward for. Mm-hmm. But I've pushed past that in my past where I've done more projects than necessarily people wanted me to do. So I think I'll certainly will be doing more storytelling as time goes on, but that's mostly what I get from people when I meet them. So, that was the last question?
I think so.
Okay.
So, thank you all for coming. And
Thank you.
for the question about just the way you interact with the fans, as you will see, I think it's really inspiring. I mean, I've seen it now for many years, and you're
overselling it. Once people get up to meet me, hi, how you doing? Hi, how you doing? Hi, how you doing?
All right.
It's going to be very underwhelming.
Anyway, Alex, thank you for your talent and your passion and your work, and we just never want you to stop.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.